There's a moment before the door opens when your hand hovers over the handle and the air feels charged. You can hear your own breath. You can feel the weight of what's on the other side, even if you can't name it yet. That's the space I want to explore with you. Welcome to Romancing the Threshold, the podcast where we don't rush through change, but romance it, where we linger in the in-between, court the unknown, and discover the soulfulness hidden in every crossing. To romance the threshold is to approach the liminal space with its unique geography, those moments of transition, uncertainty, and of becoming, not with fear or urgency, but with tenderness, imagination, curiosity, and a little devotion. It's about the art of wooing the unknown. Because as we know, change is rarely easy, but it doesn't need to be stripped of delight or of joy. We can learn to embrace the unknown through wooing, through courtship, and open ourselves to the creative possibilities in the transition. One of the types of stories that remind us of this is romance stories, love stories, the fairy tales, the myths. They show us how to hold desire without rushing to the resolution. It's about lingering in the uncertainty and trusting in the unfolding. It's a slow burn of romance. It's moving from enemies to lovers. It's about second chances. These stories teach us that every threshold can be a love story. So I invite you to call on the romantic self, call on the part of you that wants to show up to change with curiosity, as if you're falling in love for the first time. Now, in this podcast, I hope to invite you to 4 things as we go through the episodes. And these are part of the 4 tenets of this podcast and the inspiration behind it. The number 1 is softness in transition. It's about letting ourselves be held by the moment instead of grin and bearing it, instead of bracing against it, tensing up. It's about relaxing, taking that deep breath that allows us to be more present in the moment. It changes everything. It's that softness that we see in love stories when everything is geared up to that moment of declaration, and we take a deep breath and soften ourselves into that moment. Number 2, it's the idea of pleasure in uncertainty. It's about finding beauty with curiosity in the not knowing. We have to learn to look for beauty in things, to be tickled fancy, to find the whimsy, to find the joy or the pleasure, even when we have no idea what's going to happen. Yes, easier said than done. But I think when we do try to do this, it helps immensely. It helps immensely us to move through transitions with more ease. It doesn't delete the anxieties. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it allows us to be more at ease and thus being more open to out of the left field answers to the questions we are carrying through the transition. Number 3 is the idea of intimacy with the shadow. This is the space for us to make for the parts of ourselves that we have been taught to hide, that we have been embarrassed, ashamed, that we never want to touch it. All the parts of us that we put it in a box down in the basement and we forgot to look for it. But these parts don't go away. They continue to demand our attention, directly or indirectly. And the idea of intimacy with the shadow, I find it one of the places that we can really look at it is through romance stories, especially the fairy tales or the monster romance stories where the other is often portrayed as a real monster. And through the transformation, through love, it is transformed and then acknowledged. So this is an important part in exploring the threshold, because at the threshold is where we meet a lot of our shadow work, the parts of us that are demanding acknowledgement. It's the return of the repressed, the return of the parts of ourselves that we were taught to hide. And so when they come back, they are really, really oftentimes upset. And we have to approach them with a bit more tenderness before we can really relate to them. So I think this is an important part. How do we cultivate intimacy with the shadow? And this is a theme that I want to explore further, because in a lot of mythology, in a lot of fairy tales, and now with the monster romances, with the fantasy books or the romantasy books, there's a lot of this exploration of the shadow through the other being so different, being so monstrous. And I think this is a very relevant topic for us in the moment that we're living currently in our culture. Number 4 is approaching cycles with a mythic awareness. So this is about remembering that every ending is also the beginning, but it's in disguise. What I've noticed in working with astrology and psychology, studying history, is that change has a certain geography. There are certain points that they may not be the same, but they rhyme. Joseph Campbell talked about this with The Hero's Journey, where he outlined kind of the key points of a story. And I think when we approach cycles in life of change, of beginning, middle, and end, and we can understand that there's an archetypal unfolding, we can better prepare ourselves for change. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be the same. As I said, they rhyme. They're not the same. But it allows us to be more open to what might be unfolding rather than bracing ourselves, being so tense when we're going through change. I think this also helps us understand better what is the unfolding of the collective change that we are going through. So to understand cycles, the archetypal parts of the cycle really help us to navigate change. This is what I like to call the landscape of the liminal, right? There's a geography to it. And we go through these parts. And the invitation here is for you to notice this in your own life. What does it look like for you? What are the images that come up for you? So these are not just ideas. These are sort of practices that I'm inviting you to do. I'm including myself in it because as humans, we both love change, but we also resist it. And so these are practices that I hope that together we can implement in our lives, bring into our lives. And this might help not just ourselves, but even those close to us navigate change. Because as I've said before, change is inevitable. Often change is considered stressful. It brings up a lot of anxieties and uncertainty. But I believe that we can approach change and move through it with more curiosity, love, creativity. Now, the other part of this podcast, Romancing the Threshold, is that I see this podcast as the hearth, the center of the work I'm creating. So I have 2 Substack publications. One is called On Liminality, and the other one is The Healing Power of Fluff. This is the more recent publication. The On Liminality is where I explore the thresholds of life through change, grief, longing, becoming. And I'm doing that through the mythic and astrological lens. That's where I talk more about astrology, not for the day-to-day astrology, but the astrology of the archetypal part of astrology that helps us understand change in our lives, phases, and how can we best relate to the planetary archetypes. Now, the healing power of Fluff. a more recent publication, is where I'm focusing my writing on the emotional truth and elements, tropes and themes of romance books, of stories, of course, weaving psychology, bringing in some of the astrology, but looking at stories as a way to guide us through change, but with joy, play, and curiosity. The healing power of fluff has actually a longer, much more sort of many years ago story, which is, it was the title of my master's in counseling psychology thesis. When I wrote my thesis back in grad school, I was exploring, working through cinema therapy, exploring romantic comedies and dreams, working with movies as if you were working with dreams, to explore the inner journey that a heroine does or goes through when in search for romantic love. And so that was the thesis, the healing power of fluff, because for me, while fluff is dismissed as, well, fluff, it actually has a lot of depth. So in the healing power of fluff, I want to look at things that we may consider as guilty pleasures, just fluff. They're inconsequential, kind of like romance books have this strange place in our culture. They're both loved, but also disrespected. But underneath that fluff, there's actually a lot of depth when we explore them with curiosity. So that's the kind of the two places where I'm creating and I'm writing. And the podcast, Romancing the Threshold, really is the hearth where I'm trying to bridge these two parts of myself. The Liminality is my astrologer, my sort of more professional side. Healing Power of Fluff is a place for my romantic self. And here they come together. And this podcast in and of itself is a romance in the making. I've got the inspiration. I've got sort of an idea, kind of like falling in love. It's in the beginning, where it's the early stages of this love affair. So I don't have a full plan yet. I don't know how this podcast will go. I don't know if it's a happy ever after or if it's a happy for now type of situation. But the point is that together, I'm inviting you to join me on this journey, is that like any good love story, this podcast will unfold on its own time. It's going to have its own surprises, its unexpected swerves, its plot twists. And I hope you are here with me on this exploration. Now, the idea that I do have for the podcast and that I want to try out in the coming weeks is that I will have solo episodes like this one. I want to have Q&As. So this is where your help is going to be really needed, where you can send me your questions and we can kind of compile them together and create Q&A episodes. I also want to have interviews with other astrologers, authors, other types of healers on the topic of how can we better go through transitions? How do we navigate change? How do we embrace and romance life in that moment? I also want to talk about books, of course, and archetypes, and really the deep magic that we can find in liminality. Now, actually, the next episode will be an interview with my friend and mentor, astrologer Brian Clark. And in that conversation, we are exploring the theme of the threshold. What does it mean? What does it look like? And the power of myth in navigating threshold experiences in life. So this is the gist of the podcast. This is just an intro for it. And I invite you to join in, really think about it. Think about this moment in your life. What kind of threshold are you about to cross? Or maybe you're crossing. And together, let's woo the unknown. Let's romance it rather than grin and bear it. So before we sign off, I invite you to do a little practice. Something that you can walk away and bring it into your own life. So this week, I invite you to think about a part of your life that you're sort of hovering on at that doorway. You're the one standing at that doorway, about to turn the handle down and open it. And this pause on the threshold, maybe it's about a decision that you haven't made yet. Maybe it's about a conversation that you've been avoiding. Or maybe it's about a dream that you're not quite yet ready to name it out loud. So instead of rushing through it, I invite you to linger a little bit more at that pause. And I want you to ask yourself, what would it feel like to romance this moment? If this moment in your life was a love story, the beginning of a love story, how would you go about it? How would you romance it? And if you want to take this further, maybe to help you move through it, I invite you to light a candle, write down on your journal, what are you afraid of? Or perhaps, what are you secretly hoping for? Or if you prefer to be more active, I invite you to go outside. If you can, go into nature and go with this question in your mind. What would it feel like to romance this moment? And see what nature responds back to you. So that's the exercise. Or maybe if you want to keep it really, really simple, then just try taking a few deep breaths and see what rises. Where does it feel in your body? This tension, perhaps the anxiety, maybe the excitement about this threshold. Where does it feel in your body? And maybe by paying attention to where it is, an image or a sound or maybe even a song lyric might come up for you that could help you move through this threshold. That's my invitation to you. And if you really want to share it, how you went about with the exercise, and if you had any insights, I invite you to leave it in the comments. Leave your answer in the comments. Well, this is just the first episode, our first date at Romancing the Threshold. So this is what it is. Romancing the Threshold is here to help us court change with imagination, curiosity, and soul. It's to remind us that every crossing is an invitation. And if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you stay with me on this journey. I'd love it for you to subscribe to either my Healing Power Fluff or the Liminality Substack. If you also have a friend that you think would enjoy this type of podcast, please share it with them. And of course, send me your comments and your questions for the future Q&A episodes. Until next time, go gently, go boldly into the in-between with curiosity for what awaits at the threshold.